Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Audra Mitchell, and I'm the head of the Massy Learning Institute. We are really pleased that you have decided to join us for today's session entitled Unmasking Addictions in the New Normal, which will be presented by Ms. Hulsie Bhaggan. So just a little housekeeping before we get started, as is customary. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please type them into the chat box. We will allot time at the end of the presentation to respond to as many of your questions as time permits. If someone posts a question that you wanted to ask, click the thumbs up icon by that question, as this will further help us in selecting questions which you are keen to have answered. And please note, a recording of today's session will be made available to you afterwards. So now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you a woman for whom I have the greatest respect and admiration, Ms. Hulsie Bhaggan. Hulsie is no stranger to Massy, as she has been a facilitator for many years in our various programs. She is a management consultant, a neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner, and a motivational and life coach. She is also the clinical director of the New Life Ministries Treatment and Rehabilitation Center for the past 23 years. Ms. Bhaggan also produces and co-hosts the television program Addictive. So now, without further ado, I hand you over to Ms. Bhaggan. Hulsie, we welcome you.
Thank you, Audra and the MLI team. Good morning and welcome. So today we are looking at unmasking addiction in the new normal. So the question is, are you aware that addiction is considered a disease? So as we discuss addiction today, we're going to look at a couple of things. One, we are going to define what is addiction. We are going to differentiate the difference between use and abuse. We look at some of the signs, the causes and symptoms of addiction, and of course, discuss the idea of what is the addictive personality. So the first thing is, addiction is considered a lifestyle. What do we mean by that? I'm sure you would have known an individual or individuals who may have decided that they're going to stop drinking. Maybe they went into a rehab, or they attended self-help groups like AA, Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous. And what you may find is that even though they have stopped drinking, they are still frequenting the bars. And so you may find that because a person is really addicted to the lifestyle, they cannot live without being in a bar. Of course, what happens inevitably is that such a person may relapse because they have gone back into the old lifestyle. And this is why when persons enter into treatment or they have decided they are going to adopt a new lifestyle, it is recommended they do not frequent the places they normally did, or they don't really relate to the persons they were accustomed relating with. Now, I should mention that all of us can actually develop an addictive relationship with anything. So sometimes we think it might just be a substance, and we think of alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and things like that. But there are many other forms of addiction, and I'm sure if you were to look at yourselves, and as I discuss this topic further, you may find that perhaps you do have some forms of addiction, or maybe you have the propensity towards addiction. So what are considered addictive behaviors? Well, the first thing is, it might be a situation where you are unable to control your behavior. What does that mean? It means that, let us say, shopping is your addiction. And from the time you go online and you have your credit card available, even though you know you should not be shopping so much, you still do it. So that's where you have that inability to control that behavior. The second thing is something called tolerance levels. So I'm sure you recall the first time, for those of you who maybe would have smoked cigarettes. The first time you smoked a cigarette, you coughed and it was very uncomfortable. But over a period of time, your cigarette smoking increased. So you found that you were able to tolerate more and more of the substance. The third thing is that sometimes when we have an addictive personality and we have resorted to addiction, we may find it difficult to maintain healthy relationships. So you may have what is called dysfunctional relationships, one that is fraught with conflict, relationships that are always in an upheaval. There are issues where you cannot have a healthy conversation. So you may find that you develop now unhealthy, dysfunctional relationships. Another element is withdrawal symptom. So once you are not able to engage in the habit to which you're addicted or to use the substances that you're accustomed using, you will have withdrawal symptoms. For example, do you know if you are in consumption, if you consume alcohol and you use a lot of it and you're a chronic alcoholic, it is not recommended that you stop cold turkey. Because if you do, you could have severe withdrawal symptoms, which you could actually die from. So for example, you may find that people who have stopped drinking suddenly, if they don't get medical treatment first, then they may have seizures, they may have severe shakes, they may have irritability, and there are many life-threatening symptoms from alcohol withdrawal. So someone who seeks treatment for alcoholism may have to first, and in fact should go first to a doctor for medical treatment. The final thing with the addictive behaviors is that you will continue the behavior despite the fact that you know it is going to create negative consequences. So let us say you are addicted to gambling. Even though you may find yourself in deep debt, you may find yourself borrowing a lot of money, and you may find, for example, that you're borrowing from people and most of the times you're not able to pay back. You are still actually borrowing and you continue to gamble. So a lot of people actually find themselves gambling incessantly, borrowing money, and are not able to stop. So one of the things we also found is that addiction really is also a family disease. And what does that mean? When there's an addict in your family, everybody is affected. Everybody will have a problem because what you would have found is that the family members now have to find ways to cope with this person who is in the home. And addiction, therefore, is also progressive. So, for example, those persons who might be addicted to a substance, let us say you have started using alcohol. Maybe you started off with 1 beer, and then you progress to 2 beers, and then 5 years later, you're drinking cases of beers, or maybe you've moved on to harder substances. So the disease is progressive and it is also relapsable. That is to say, there's no cure for addiction. It can't be, well, I went into treatment and now I am cured of the disease. What happens really is that you have to stay now on a lifelong program. You have to develop different habits. And what you may find is that having now developed different habits, you may choose a different pathway. So we are never cured from addiction. We can relapse after 20 years of stopping the use of the substance or the behavior. If we don't stay on track, we can relapse and it can become worse. Now, the interesting thing about relapsing is that when we relapse, we go back to, we don't go back to where we started, but we started from where we had ended. So say, for example, you were someone who were using 4 bottles of alcohol a day when you stopped and when you went into treatment. If you relapse, you don't start back with 1 drink. You may start with 1 drink, but very quickly you move on to 4 bottles and then 5 bottles. So this is where we say it's a relapsable disease, and it is always advisable, therefore, that you move into a new lifestyle, because as I said earlier, addiction really is a lifestyle. So what is the difference between use and abuse? Use would be what we call a social drinker or a social user. So let us say, for example, you're one of those persons who may go to a casino and you may place a couple of bets, and then at the end of the day, you will leave. And it's okay, maybe 3 months later, you may go back, or maybe never go back again. Or maybe you are a social user of using, let's say, alcohol. So you would have a glass of wine at dinner, and that's it. And some days you may not have the dinner, and that's fine with you too. So use will be for those people who are recreational users. So for example, there's nothing wrong with shopping online. That is considered normal. However, it becomes abuse when it is regular, when it is compulsive and excessive, to the point where you cannot stop yourself, and to the point where it affects your health, it affects your relationships, it affects your functioning at work and that of others. So the impact will be greatly affected. So the difference between use and abuse, therefore, is not really quite a thin line, simply because you can monitor yourself and you can be able to say whether or not you are using a substance, or you have a particular behavior to which you're probably developing a propensity, or you can say, well, I'm just socially, propelled that way and it's okay. Now, what is the difference between, let us say, the addictive personality and someone who is into recreational use of a substance, or maybe they have a habit and it's a one-off habit? What are the traits of the addictive personality? And this is something we all should ponder about, because who knows, one of us may be addicted and may have the addictive personality, and we may not be addicted to the normal things that we know people are addicted to. So for example, when someone is deep into the addiction, what you may find is that they start to lie about what is happening with them. So if, for example, you notice that the person is increasing their use of the substance, so maybe this person is always going into debt, and then you may want to ask, well, why is this happening? And the person may say, well, I have a lot of expenses now, I have to go to the doctor, or my car is, I'm having a problem with my vehicle. So they may find different excuses and they will lie about why they are spending money. Of course, the person will constantly be able to give you information that is not true. So basically, lying becomes a very much a trademark for people who are actually using substances. After a while, stretching the truth becomes like second nature, because the person becomes deep in denial. Now, what is denial? Denial comes in different forms. For example, if somebody is in denial, they will minimize. They will say, well, I only take 2 drinks, or I only gamble $100 once in a month. Or they may justify it and say, well, I need to do that because I'm stressed out. Or they may blame somebody else for doing it. Or they may intellectualize it and say, well, there's nothing wrong with gambling because it is a legal thing as long as I don't go overboard. So what you may find, therefore, is that lying becomes second nature, and they find all kinds of ways to cover up the addiction. What you may also find is that when a person becomes addicted, he or she will manipulate others, their loved ones, and they will find all kinds of reasons to, for example, they may profess they love the person, but they may not really love the person at that point in time, because once you're addicted, you're disconnected from your feelings. Your feelings are suppressed. And what we have found in treatment is that persons who are in treatment, they don't feel guilt or remorse at the point in time when they gave their relatives very emotional stories to get money or to extort money. But when they go into treatment and the addiction starts to wear off, that is when they start to feel guilty and remorseful. Generally, though, a person who has an addictive personality actually is highly manipulative. A third element has to do with impulsive behavior, where the person has very little impulse control. And that is why, for example, you may have a person who has drunk a lot of alcohol, perhaps, and is not able to drive, but will insist on driving. This is someone who cannot stop themselves from judging. In fact, their judgments are very faulty, and they engage in behaviors where they show that they are not able to have that impulse control. So impulsive behavior is one of the elements. Another element has to do with criminal behavior. Now, this might be someone who had good values, came from a good home perhaps, has a good job, these things that we consider to be a normal part of society. And what happens, once the addiction becomes so endemic and a person finds themselves without resources, they will do almost anything to support their habit. So for example, they may commit crimes. Crimes may not be with guns, but they may go into white collar crimes. So for example, let us say you're working in an institution where there are opportunities to commit a crime. You may engage in white collar crime. You may borrow money, you may steal from your co-workers, you may pilfer from the company. And so a lot of the times a person like that may end up in criminal activity. In some cases, people resort to prostitution and they may give it different names, but the bottom line is they may engage into criminal behavior. Then there is sensation seeking. They always find they're bored, so they need something exciting. They need to have the adrenaline rushing. So they will do dangerous things. They will take risks that you and I will not take. And generally, they are constantly experimenting with new things. So, as I said, they are bored easily and they need sensation. One of the key drivers of addiction is low self-esteem. And when persons have low self-esteem, they tend to be very insecure and have very low confidence levels. So, for example, someone who has low self-esteem may be very inhibited. So let us say the company has an event. Such a person may not want to go into the event because they feel they may have to mix or they may have to dance or do things that they're not accustomed doing. So some people take a drink, and when they take a couple of drinks, they are the life of the party. And that is just one example of how we can actually self-medicate to be able to cope with negative feelings. So some people pump themselves up with certain kinds of drugs even when they are going to events where they feel uncomfortable. What you may also find is that the addictive personality is one with obsessive compulsive behaviors. So their thoughts are obsessive. So once they start to think about something, they cannot stop. And their behaviors are, as I said, impulsive. So they are not able to stop that compulsion to do what they want to do. And this is where, for example, when a person is addicted, family members or employers, let us say an employer may say to the person, well, you know, if you continue staying home on a Monday morning, or if you continue borrowing money or not being able to perform on the job, you're likely to lose your job. You're going to have to suspend you. We're going to have to discipline you. And what you will find is such a person, that doesn't faze them at all, because at that point in time, they are so far gone that rational thinking and rational logical reasons will not help that person from stopping the addiction. Now, you can actually pick up when people have obsessive compulsive tendencies, and you can actually see that in teenagers. So it is important to look at your teenager, at your kid, to see whether they have certain kinds of obsessions and compulsions. Another element that drives the addictive personality can be two things. It can be nurture, where we learn based on the environment we've grown up in, or it can be our nature. There are some people who are predisposed, genetically predisposed to addiction. And so if you were to look at the family line, the bloodline, sometimes it actually skips a generation, but you can actually see addiction in families. In some cases, the entire family has addiction issues. One of the key things that comes out with persons with addictive behaviors and addictive personalities is that they do not take responsibility for their own shortcomings. It is always someone else's fault. They are always engaging in the blame game. And so with, again, young people, even though this is a developmental phase, still, if it becomes an endemic habit, you may discover that that person has a tendency towards addiction and the addictive personality. Another key element is social alienation. A person who is socially alienated will most likely turn to some kind of substance or some addictive behavior. And especially now with the lockdown, still to some extent, and some of the restrictions that are in place, you may find now persons who have that tendency towards addiction may deepen their use and their abuse simply because they are now isolated. So this is why it is very important for us to be able to continue to network and to be in touch with our loved ones And even those of us in a company setting, in the organizational setting, it is important for us to touch base with people and to see where they are at. Because persons who have the tendency towards addiction are people who can relapse into the old behaviors, or their use and abuse can actually increase. A key element, and again, it has to do with what is happening now in the world with the pandemic, is that persons who already had issues with stress and anxiety will find it far more difficult to cope. So you may not use a substance like, say, alcohol or cocaine or marijuana, but you might be using prescription drugs, sleeping tablets. You might take codeine, you might take anything to help you to relax and to escape from your current reality. So the spiral of addiction can increase when your stress and anxiety levels cannot be managed. And this is where it is so important to have conversations with people about what is affecting you and how are you feeling. If you say you're feeling stressed or you're feeling anxious, that doesn't mean to say you're weak. All it does say is that you're human, because as a human being, we will have these natural tendencies and feelings. So I recommend strongly that you learn to talk about how you feel, especially now in the pandemic, because poor management of stress and anxiety could lead to some difficulties later down. So we have looked at all of these traits of the addictive personality. And now I'm not saying if you have one of these, you might be an addict, or not, of course, I'm not saying that. But if you have found that, out of these, quite a few of these, you have identified as possible things that you feel, or maybe you know someone with that, it is something that you would want to look at more seriously. Now, what really is addiction? In my view, addiction really, like any other goal setting, is really a search for happiness. People are thinking, well, if I use this substance, I'm going to feel happy. And for a moment, they do feel happy. However, when the addiction sets in, it is no longer happiness. It is merely an escape from facing life on its own terms. So what addictions are you familiar with? Think for a moment. Are you familiar with any addictions apart from those that we are accustomed with? Well, there are two types: substances and behavioral. So substances will be things like alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, cocaine, the usual suspects. But then what about codeine? Certain cough syrups that we use that may have codeine that puts us to sleep. I have known and treated women, especially women, who got addicted to cough syrups because of the codeine element. And sometimes they're drinking cases of cough syrup. When we go to their apartments, it's stacked with cases of cough syrup bottles, empty bottles. We could be addicted to food. It's a comfort for us. We could be addicted to caffeine, energy drinks. We have had to treat people for energy drinks, painkillers, any form of painkiller, steroids, prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs. We can be addicted to sugar, inhalants, glue, solvents. So all these substances are very common, and this is something that we should look at, especially again with our young people. But then there are behavioral addictions, the ones that we overlook. Well, I spoke about gambling, but what about shoplifting? Some people who are shoplifters do not need to shoplift, but it's really an addiction. Then there's kleptomania, shopping. One of the big emerging addictions today is internet addiction and social media addiction. And on the internet, there are many quizzes and assessments that you can actually take to see whether or not you're addicted to the internet or social media. So I invite you to probably do that. Some people are addicted to religion, and at every moment they will quote a religious text to you. They always speak religion, and there's a difference between religion and spirituality. Codependency. Some people have this need, this obsessive need to feel needed. We could be addicted to our place, to our work. Now, work is healthy. If we don't set boundaries, it becomes unhealthy. So there must be a balance between work and our life. Exercise. There are some people who are so addicted to exercise. They may spend hours in the gym and they are focused on programs on the internet. They have calorie counters. They have all kinds of gadgets to measure how many paces they made for the day. So exercise is healthy, but it must be in moderation. We are addicted to partying, sex and pornography. Pornography, that's one of the big ones now, and especially with the lockdown, is an emerging and growing addiction. We can be addicted to eating. We're eating away our problems. video games and online gaming, cutting ourselves. There's currently a real issue with teenagers cutting themselves, causing self-harm, pain seeking. So because they have emotional pain, they hide it in the physical pain. And we could be addicted to a person. And this is where some people actually kill, saying that they love this person and they cannot live without this person. And this is part of the behavioral addiction. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of substance abuse? Very quickly, bloodshot or glazed eyes, but I must say now that people being aware of this actually use eye drops to clear their eyes. Dilated or constricted pupils. There may be abrupt weight changes, changes in hygiene. The teeth start getting bad, their skin changes, and you may find that such a person starts to have problems sleeping or sleeping too much. Then there are the physical evidence, things like the personality or mood changes, they have mood swings, changes in their daily patterns, financial woes, getting into trouble. And these are things you can see from an external point of view. Again, concerned family members, everybody's talking about this person needs help. Secretive or suspicious behavior, items missing from the home, poor performance, and of course the presence of paraphernalia in the home or the presence of drugs. So the addiction and the social lockdown. Basically, as I mentioned before, the social distancing and isolation has really become quite risky for persons struggling with addiction. And persons in recovery are now alienated to a large extent from their support system. And this has really led to a point of more self-medication and more behavioral and substance abuse addiction. And the bottom line here, therefore, is that when we have individuals in our lives, whether a co-worker or whether someone within our family circle, it is very important to keep these channels of communication open so that we'll be able to have conversations and help that person so that they can deal with their addiction. So basically, I wanted to share today some of the elements of addiction to get some information over to you. And I now will hand you over to Audra for any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Hulsie. So now I see we have a couple of questions and some comments. So Renee Barnett will now take us through the Q&A portion of this webinar.
Thank you, Audra. Thank you, Hulsie. Okay, so our first comment this morning is, what are your views on vaping?
I didn't hear you, Renee.
Apologies, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay, good. What are your views on vaping? That's our first question this morning.
Vaping is as dangerous as smoking nicotine. And all the research has shown that vaping is a very dangerous preoccupation. And if you look at the experience in the United States with so many deaths that are occurring, I will recommend strongly that find something healthier to do other than vaping.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next question is, emotional eating a symptom of addiction to eating?
Emotional eating really is related to emotional issues. So what you may find, in the same way I would drink alcohol to really push down whatever problems I'm experiencing, I eat food as a comfort. So if I were to enter into some form of therapy, you may find I'm able to bring out the issues I'm trying to eat away and to deal with those issues, aerate it and move on. But if I don't deal with my deep-seated issues, my unresolved issues, I will find some form of either escape or pushing it down further into my system.
Thank you, Hulsie. Okay, here is our next question. How can we encourage others to talk about their feelings and share their concerns when this is not natural for some and has been seen by our culture as a weakness or something that women do?
Very good question. Actually, we would not just go to someone with whom we don't have a trusting relationship and speak about our issues and problems. So it starts off with, I can talk about my issues with someone I trust and someone who will keep my confidence. So if, for example, within the workplace, you may not have someone whom you feel you can trust, then I know, for example, Massy has its EAP program. So then you seek professional help. There's nothing wrong with seeking therapy. And I know a lot of people feel that if I go into therapy, something is wrong with me. Not at all. It is very healthy as a human being to seek support systems. So if you have an issue and you cannot speak to somebody within your closed circle because you don't feel that they will keep your confidence, seek professional assistance.
Okay, good. That actually ties in with the comment that we have here from Julie Avey. She says, love that comment. Seeing you are stressed or have anxiety is not weakness. It is showing that you are in touch with your emotions and that you are human.
Excellent.
Okay, so here's our next question from Laverne. How do you deal with someone in the office who is suffering with depression and may be addicted to the attention from the depression?
Well, that's a very powerful question. The thing with depression, if it's clinical depression, that person will really need a psychiatric intervention. And so, yes, some people actually is attention seeking. But if it's clinical, it is far more than attention seeking, because people with clinical depression can also be suicidal. So somebody like that really needs professional help.
Okay, thank you. So let me just go ahead to the next question. What therapy is there for the family of those persons who are addicted to some form of dependency?
Very good question again. It is important, for example, at our treatment center, our program is a family-oriented program. We don't just treat the addict, we treat the families also. The second thing is, if the person is not into a program, there are things like there are family programs like Al-Anon, families of alcoholics, and families of narcotics, Naranon. So those are two family support groups that they can actually go to and get help. So either in a rehab center where there's a family-oriented program, or the self-help groups, families of addicts or persons who are dependent can get help there.
Okay, great. And this one is from an anonymous person. How do you get a teenager to open up for conversation? Did you hear that question?
No, I didn't get that question, Rennie.
How do you get a teenager to open up for conversation?
Wow, that's a real powerful question.
Yes.
Teenagers generally are already experiencing so many hormonal changes and so many issues. In fact, teenagers are very troubled people. And so it is important really to build a rapport with them. And if for some reason the rapport is not there, it is good again to seek a counselor who is into children, working with children. Would not be a normal, or you call a psychologist, seek a child psychologist. So a child psychologist is trained to deal with teenagers and young people, and they are really good at it. So that's what I would recommend. If not a child psychologist, it must be somebody whom the child has a good relationship with, a healthy relationship, and someone whom they can trust. If that doesn't work now, teenagers, quite a few of them are on substances currently. There's a high level of substance abuse among teenagers, especially marijuana. In a case like that, they should really see an addiction counselor if there's any suspicion that the young person is on some kind of drug.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Can someone go to the absolute opposite side where they overthink every repetitive process and eliminate any potential addictive behaviors like coffee, shopping, any alcohol consumptions, etc.?
Well, how you really need to do it is by not necessarily just going and eliminating all these things, but really trying to live a balanced life. The bottom line is, if as a human being, I'm my own best friend, and I have a good relationship with myself first and foremost, I'm leading a healthy, balanced life. I have filled myself with a sense of worth, because a lot of the times the lack of self-worth will drive me to these things I hang on to. So if I'm a balanced, healthy, happy individual, you may find I don't have the need to hang on to anything. So it's not so much getting rid of these things. It is really finding myself at the deepest level, seeking my happiness. And once I'm balanced that way, I don't need anything external to me. It's like some people could be alone without being lonely. And that's a good test. If you can be alone without being lonely, it means that you are your own best friend and you really don't need external things to hang on to make you feel good.
Okay, we have an interesting one here from Brian Martin. What are the dangers of being addicted to work?
Well, like any other addiction, it affects all the other aspects of your life. One, you can get physically sick. Two, it is going to affect your relationships, both at work and at home. Because let us say you are a workaholic. What happens eventually? You start becoming resentful of your peers and your bosses and everybody else because you're saying to yourself, I'm overworked, I'm overloaded, I'm underpaid, and that resentment starts to build. So you will find that it affects your working relationship, but it also impacts on your social relationships and particularly on your health. So being a workaholic is like any other addiction, it is not healthy.
We have one here from Sylvan Puckering. Is there such a thing as an addictive boss or a leader with reference to managing people?
Well, maybe he's referring to some of us considered control freaks. So we like to control external things sometimes because internally we don't feel we are in control. So that also applies to perfectionism. We are always trying to make everything outside of us perfect, but there's no such thing as perfectionism. There's high standard. So it's really about being in control because internally I feel out of control. So I would need to control the people, places, and things outside of me.
You might have covered this one already, but you can repeat it for Trisha Martin. When there are limited or no avenues for professional therapy, etc., how do you recommend assisting a worker or a family member?
Well, if there's no avenue for, let's say, professional treatment, then find someone whom the person can trust and who may have some skills. Now, some people actually go to their religious leaders, somebody in their church, somebody in the community, a social worker. For example, in the Ministry of Social Development, they have social workers. There are wellness centers throughout the country. So in the public health system, there's also help. So even though they may not be able to say pay or have access to paid help, they can actually access the public system. And there is help there too. And as I said, within the community, whether it is their church or some other organization, an NGO, there are many NGOs who are out there willing to help. Like let's say Families in Action, for example, is a good place where you can go. There's a day program and you can get help.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go to this comment first before I go to the next question. This person just wanted to say thanks for saying that persons still have stigma against mental illness. Seeing a therapist is not a weakness.
Okay.
The next question, can you talk a little bit about being strong before being able to help others? Also, is giving up on someone sometimes a strategy to let them see the desperate situation?
Right, I like the idea of being strong. So for example, someone who is in early recovery, we will recommend to them that they should not go and try to save somebody else. So if they observe a family member or a friend having a problem, instead of they trying to go and rescue that person, they should get somebody else to do that because they may not be in a good place as yet to be able to pull somebody out. So being strong means that it is for somebody in recovery, having a solid foundation. And therefore, for example, at our center, persons in recovery have to be at least 5 years clean before they could be in a position to help others in a professional capacity. Can you repeat the second question for me, please?
Sure. Is giving up on someone sometimes a strategy to let them see the desperate situation?
Yes, actually, when we do interventions and if the person decides that they don't want any help, what we do is we recommend to the family or the support persons to go and get help themselves. So they can join Al-Anon or Naranon or see a psychologist or somebody and get help Because what happens with the persons with whom you would have drawn the line, they will try to manipulate you, they will try to send you on a guilt trip. So if you are not strong enough, you will not be able to stand up to that person. But yes, there are times when you realize, despite everything you have tried, the person doesn't want to get help. So in that case, you need to get help for yourself, and drawing the line may push them to a point where they realize now that they need to go and get help.
Okay, great. The next question is from an anonymous person. The person saw a professional, but said they weren't doing anything for them. So I guess their question is, what do you do?
Yeah, well, it depends on what help were you seeking. And for example, if you have a situation where it's a clinical issue, you should be seeing a psychiatrist. Let us say, for example, you have depression or bipolar mood disorder or something of that sort. You might need to see a psychiatrist instead. If it is something more deeply psychological, you may need to see a psychologist. If it's a question of trauma, you may want to see a psychologist who specializes in trauma therapy. The key with going into therapy of any sort, however, is I must be willing to take the risk, to take the plunge. I must be willing to go deep and be truthful and honest in my therapy sessions. And so sometimes if you don't connect well with your provider, then again, you may not have that kind of linkage to do it. So as I said, I can't answer that question fully because I don't know all the facts and details, but the bottom line is you need to know exactly, get some help to define what kind of help do you really need. And based on what your needs are, then you can match that with the provider.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question is from an anonymous person as well. Is scrupulosity a result of addiction or is it a cause?
What did you say is what?
Scrupulosity. Is it a result of addiction or is it a cause?
Well, that one is a new word to me. I don't know what is scrupulosity.
Probably scrupulous behavior.
Or scrupulous behavior. That's risky behavior or sensation seeking. That is more what we call the addictive personality. So there are some people who will do strange things for attention. They may have the sense of values, you know, whether you have values or not, somehow is not the same thing with pushing yourself towards addiction. Because some people who have very good values, very scrupulous in what they do, but generally because of the addictive personality, they may be driven to that. So that is a kind of chicken and egg situation.
Okay, let's go to our next question. How would you define healthy self-esteem? This is from Michael Phillips.
Right, because if I have self-esteem that is high like the sky, I'm going to be extremely arrogant. I'm going to be, as you say, Trinidad, full of myself. Healthy self-esteem is where I can be assertive in the sense that, you know, I have respect for you and you have respect for me and we can have a good conversation. I can talk about my strengths as well as my weaknesses. I can take feedback easily. I can give feedback well. I don't seek approval constantly. People's opinion of me doesn't make it bad or good for me.